Do not cross me, gringo. If you cross me, you will not live to tell the tale. As you might have gathered from that little introduction, I am slightly obsessed with the spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone. I first discovered spaghettis, like a lot of young men of my generation, in the mid-1970s, when the initial Dollars trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly were first shown on British television on BBC One in the 9:25 film slot on Monday night, 9:25, just after the news. Leone's shooting style, the music of Ennio Morricone, the acting chops of Eastwood and Van Cleef, the action and the general terseness and romanticism of these films made a massive impact on me, and it was probably the first time I was exposed to existentialism, and I was forever changed by these movies. This album in particular, the RCA version of the soundtracks of Fistful and For a Few Dollars More, had very heavy rotation when I was a kid at home. It cost me £1 from the electricity board shop. That would have been in about 1975. This is not my original. This is a replacement which I bought a few years ago, which is on coloured vinyl, but it's one of my favourite records of all time, and I played and played and played it as a kid. Something that was really popular with me as a youth, again, was reading film tie-ins, and I had lots and lots of them, generally for films which I missed or for films I was too young to get in to see. And I purchased some of the dollar westerns, and I'm going to talk you through my collection of these now, because recently I've managed to complete my collection, which wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Back in the 70s, I only had 2 or 3 of these books, and I got rid of them, and a recent purchase a while ago of a copy of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the third of the Dollars trilogy, really sort of got me thinking I should pick these up because they're big memories, and lots of them I never read, so I'm going to talk you through them right now. What you see here is the tie-in edition of A Fistful of Dollars by Frank Chandler, and this is one I never read at the time, and this is my favourite spaghetti western because obviously this is where the cycle begins, and it presents the man with no name, alone, unprotected, between 2 different villainous groups, and he's out for what he can get. The film, of course, has that wonderful outsider quality that Eastwood portrayed so well. I think one critic said that he acted like he was in a suit of armour, but that critic didn't get the point. What he did was get across a man in control with a past who realised that if the past was too revealed, he might lose that control. And that's something we see hinted at in the denouement of A Fistful of Dollars. But I absolutely loved this film, and it is one of my favourites of all time. And even though Leone went on to bigger and better things in an epic sense, for me, he never topped this, and this is magnificent. This is a UK first printing of A Fistful of Dollars in tandem, and these books were regularly reissued throughout the 70s and into the early 80s, and they went from tandem to Universal and Star, and they used to pop up all the time with slightly different liveries. I don't have the full set in a common livery. I'm not too bothered about that. I just want to get copies in really good condition, because some of these fetch really silly money, up to about 50 quid. I didn't pay more than 15 for any of them. Most of them I got for less, and I was really pleased with that. So yeah, this one is by Frank Chandler. I've read a part of it, and they are very close to the films, you find. They obviously went straight from the finished films and used them as references, and the ones I've read are actually very good. For a Few Dollars More, the second of the Dollars films, here novelised by Joe Millard, who did most of the books in this series. There are a total of 8, 3 tie-ins and 5 original novels featuring the man with no name, which are quite interesting, which a lot of people have never come across, and as I say, they faded away by the early 80s, but they really were popular for a very long time. And again, I used to have this one. I haven't reread it. It was very faithful. I enjoyed it enormously. And as you see, it's got marvellous cover artwork there. And this was very much the edition I had back in the 70s. This was first published in the US in 1967. and obviously it had a film tie-in cover, and you can get those, but they're quite pricey. But this was the edition I had, and this particular printing is from 1977 in the Wyndham imprint. And here's the copy of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, which I showed a while ago in a recent video, and it was picking this up for just, I think it was about £2 in really good nick, just on the off chance, was what got me into the idea of collecting these. And I thought this would be a long, hard road, but I managed it in just a few weeks without going over the top with spending, which was just great. And that wonderful, wonderful cover artwork with the man with no name, who of course is called Blondie in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, with Lee Van Cleef, who is called Angel Eyes in the film. Interestingly, is called Sentenza in the book, and I don't think he's actually referred to as Sentenza anywhere in the film at all, but he is in this novel, and he's not called Angel Eyes in the novel, so that's quite interesting. Not sure what happened there. And of course a wonderful depiction of Tuco, played by Eli Wallach, who really set the template for the later spaghetti westerns in the Zapata Mexican Revolution frame, which were very, very common. The idea of a Mexican, a bellicose sort of character who was always laughing, quite villainous, and usually sort of short and fat, and not always that attractive, the ugly, of course. And, you know, that became a bit of a thing, and they were often played by people like Gianmaria Volante in A Bullet for the General, and Thomas Millian, the Italian actor, who I really like Thomas Millian, but he's so over the top, I do struggle with him at times. The novel was, of course, first published in the States in 1967, and this is a UK 1977 reprint, and you see it has the dollar western sigil on the back there. Great bit of artwork featuring the man with no name. Absolutely fantastic. And this is a really great little novel, actually. It's amazing how such a long film could be encapsulated in such a short book, but that's very often the way, isn't it? There are many, many films of short books which are quite long, and this is no exception. So after those three initial tie-ins, somebody decided to produce a series of 5 novels featuring the man with no name, which were not ever filmed. They were just sort of done, I think they were commissioned, I suspect, by Universal in the USA, because the 3 films had been released back to back there and had been hugely successful, and obviously successful throughout Europe as well. And somebody obviously had the bright idea of saying, you know, let's do some man with no name novels. And I bought this in a lot of 2 because I was trying to get a copy of one of the other ones in the right livery, and this came with it, so I went for it. This is one of the hardest ones to find, actually, and I think I've got the chronology right here in terms of publication history. Now, in terms of internal chronology, whether there's an ongoing story is another matter, because I haven't read them all, so we will have to come back to that when I've done that. But my suspicion is that there isn't, and I do want to talk about the internal chronology of the films later on, because it's different from what many people think. So this is A Dollar to Die For, and you'll see this is by Brian Fox, and this is a tandem edition from 1970-71. As you see, the pricing there, 4 shillings 20p, Britain decimalised from the old imperial in February 1971. I'm trying to think the exact date. I used to know it. I remember it well as a kid because I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was in school. I'd learned the imperial system, which is really complicated. And then we had decimalisation coming in, which was really easy. So for us kids, it was really something. Older people will still now use terms like a shilling. And even I do that myself as well, because I can remember the old money. So this is tandem, 4 shillings. And it says 4th printing there in a tin star. This guy looks nothing like Clint Eastwood. And as you see, the man with no name, the gun-ready hero of the good, bad and the ugly. And that's quite different, as you see, from the other one. So I had to get one in a commonish livery to make up the set, and this one will be sold on. And here's the UK edition. This is a 1977 reprint. As I say, I found this the hardest to get, and I haven't read this one. Great title. What you'll notice with slightly later printings is that they drop the dollar sigil at the top of the front of the jacket, but they retain it on the rear. And there we go, there it is on the rear. And this is in Wyndham, an imprint of Star, so they go from Target to Wyndham. A Coffin Full of Dollars from 1971, UK edition. As you see, it has the dollar sigil there at the top, and there's Clint, and you'll notice this red sun behind him. Now, I had a later edition originally, which went out a long time ago, and by that point they dropped the dollar, pushed the title up, so the text block was at the top there, and behind Clint there was a different rendering of the drawing, different colours. It was black and white, and a blue circle behind him, so you'll find variants out there. And there is a film called A Coffin Full of Dollars, which is quite recent. It's nothing whatsoever to do with this as far as I can tell. And this was the one I read as a kid, which was one of the original novels. I read the tie-ins, but not the originals apart from this one. And this is interesting. In this one, with a recent reread, I really enjoyed it actually. The man with no name teams up with a rival bounty hunter who's called Shadrach, who is very, very, very like Lee Van Cleef. He's very like Lee Van Cleef in For a Few Dollars More, except he's purely a bounty hunter. He doesn't have the motivation that Colonel Mortimer has in A Few Dollars More. And it really is quite good fun. And they end up joining this travelling circus. And of course, The Coffin Full of Dollars, that's a reference to another famous spaghetti western film. And that reference, of course, is to Django, which a lot of you will have seen, featuring Franco Nero, directed by Sergio Corbucci. Fantastic film. And of course, Django drags a coffin, but, well, we're not going to say what's in it in case you haven't seen it, but it is a cracker and it's worth picking up on Blu-ray now. It was banned, I think, in lots of places for years, and there were dozens and dozens of spaghetti westerns which came after, which had Django in the title, which had nothing to do with the original. And often Franco Nero, if he was in a film, the distributors would put Django in the title, even if it was nothing to do with that character. So Coffin Full of Dollars does rather reference Django in that way. But it's a cracking read, actually. I really recommend it. Next came The Devil's Dollar Sign. You'll notice how all the titles have dollar or blood in them, pretty much. And it reminds me of what Stan Lee always said about Martin Goodman, the publisher at Atlas and Marvel, about how he had this thing about if you use certain words in titles, kids would be more likely to buy the comics. And Martin Goodman's favourite word was savage. He felt that would really get the sales in there. So that's why there's lots of Marvel comics from back in the day with savage as their title. And, you know, these go with dollar and blood a lot. So I'm looking forward to reading this. And again, you know, they're really beautiful artwork. I think they're cracking little books. They really are. They're hard to find in mint condition. A lot of these have been covered by laminate. I think they're mostly from the same collection that got split up, but I was really pleased to get them with unbroken spines, even though some of them have faded. The exploitation level goes up again with this title, Blood for a Dirty Dollar. So we get blood and dollar again, and a cracking little portrait of Clint there, it has to be said. And you'll notice the star colophon there at the base. By this point, this is a later reprint. Let's have a look what this is. I would say this is probably 80s, early 80s. Let's just have a look. This is a 1981 reprint, and these were certainly all OP by the time I started in the book trade in 84. So this was their last hurrah there, but I think you'll agree that's absolutely fantastic. Just as a quick side, this is my Blu-ray of Face to Face, one of the better spaghettis, Thomas Millian there, and Gia Maria Volante, John Wells, as he was called in A Fistful of Dollars. Really wonderful Italian actor, and great guy, left-wing, serious sort of communist theatre type chap, and he appears in all sorts of great Italian films. He's in a wonderful TV series of Carlo Levi's book, Christ Stopped at Eboli, which is one of my favourite Italian works, and he's also in The Red Circle, Circle Rouge by Melville, which is amazing noir film, absolutely superb. We'll talk about that on the channel again. The sequence came to a close with The $1 Million Blood Hunt by Joe Millard, and this is an absolutely beautiful Universal paperback, and I think Universal, Wyndham, Tandem, Star, it's all the same thing really. And I got this from Morris at Zardos, and absolutely gorgeous. This is the nicest one of the lot, it has to be said. And again, I haven't read it. It still has the dollar on the rear. Let's have a look at what date this print is from. This one is from, let's see, 1978. And interestingly, there's an Old West book club order card. There's not a book club. This series of books, they were Time Life, and they're faux leather. I saw a set of them at the paperback fair, and I remember one of my dad's friends had them when I was a kid, And there's a brilliant one about gamblers. They're thematic about all aspects of the Old West. And the one about gambling was absolutely brilliant. It was superb. And I would like a set of those, actually. I was very tempted when I saw them at the paperback fair. But, you know, the price of them and carrying them is quite something. But if I ever see that gambling one, I'm going to pick it up. There's a wonderful picture in there about an armature that people used to wear under their shirt. And if they stretch their hand a certain way, an ace would come out from under their shirt into their hand. Very, very naughty, aces and eights. But yeah, absolutely gorgeous artwork there. I think you'll agree. So going back to the initial trilogy and their internal chronology, that is the order of the story in the timeline of the films. I just want to talk about this briefly. Now, of course, you read left to right in English. So normally when showing a lineup of a trilogy, I would show Fistful first, then For a Few Dollars More, then The Good and the Bad, the Ugly. But if you watch the films carefully, you will see that the release order and the making order is different from the actual internal chronology, if that is, you believe that they are a trilogy. Now, of course, Leone pretty much said that they weren't a trilogy in the sense that The Man with No Name wasn't the linking character. It's just that A Fistful of Dollars was really successful. Another film was set up as quickly as it could be, with Van Cleef as well, who Leone pulled out of obscurity to make the film. Great job there, Leone. And of course, what the Italians do in the film industry at that point was that whatever was popular, they just repeat the experiment and there would be loads of copyists. And that, you know, went on well up into the 80s. And of course, Italian cinema is pretty popular cinema, pretty much collapsed. And Italian cinema was the most vivid and successful cinema in continental Europe for many decades. More people went to the cinema in Italy than anywhere else in Europe for years and years and years. They had a very sort of vivid cinematic culture because, of course, it's a hot country. People would go along. There'd be an intermission, even in a short film, so they could go outside, have a drink, go to the loo, or have a cigarette, what have you. And these films were made more or less back to back really quickly. They weren't released initially in the UK and America. There was a copyright problem, of course, which I'll talk about again. But in terms of internal chronology, if you look for the clues in the films, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly actually takes place before For a Few Dollars More, and that takes place before A Fistful of Dollars. Now, there's a couple of videos out there on YouTube about this, but I'm going to talk you through my take on it. Now, when I was a young guy and I first watched these films, of course, I saw them in the release order. And I was fascinated by the fact that in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood, as the Man with No Name, is wearing a duster, a long white coat. And you'll see one of the characters wearing a duster in John Ford's The Searchers. And he doesn't put the poncho on till the very end of the film, just before the climax. And he picks it up from a dying soldier. And he gives the soldier a little drag on his cheroot. And then you see him stand up and the poncho is there. The poncho does not belong to the Man with No Name. He takes it from the soldier, or at least that's the implication, because he hasn't worn it throughout the film. And then we get the climax. Now, of course, if the Man with No Name acquires the poncho at that point, that means that A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More must take place Now, of course, the stakes go up with each film. Each film, the Man with No Name makes more money with each of the scams, with each of the sort of escapades. So it is quite interesting. But if you look in the films, this is borne out. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly takes place during the Civil War. The Civil War takes place before the events in For a Few Dollars More and A Fistful of Dollars. How do we know this? If you watch closely, there is a scene in For a Few Dollars More where Colonel Mortimer, played by the very wonderful Lee Van Cleef, sees a photograph of the Man with No Name in a newspaper standing over the body of a villain he's just shot to claim the bounty on. And the date it shows post-dates the Civil War. There's also a showdown sequence between Colonel Mortimer and the Man with No Name, in which Colonel Mortimer shoots the Man with No Name's hat off his head, and it flies up in the air. He shoots it again, falls down, he shoots it again, and so on, leaving holes in it. And then if you watch A Fistful of Dollars, that hat which he's wearing is full of holes. Now, I think that's slightly more tenuous. But there is no absolute reason to doubt that For a Few Dollars More takes place after The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. So why didn't the man with no name quit then when he got that massive score with Tuco? What happened in his life which led to him sort of coming down from that really big score right down to the singleton existential score of A Fistful of Dollars? It's an interesting thing. Ultimately, of course, we must go with the Italian canonical take on it, which is these films are not related in terms of being sequels to each other. After all, in the first film, the man with no name is referred to as Joe, even though he doesn't offer his name. In the second film, For a Few Dollars More, he is called Manco, and he wears the leather gauntlet around his hand. He's not a bounty hunter in the first film. He doesn't wear that gauntlet. And in the third film, he gets called Blondie. Again, these names are bestowed upon him by other characters, with the possible exception of Manco, which to me sounds like a nickname. So it is up in the air. It doesn't really matter. It's all good, clean fun, and we enjoy it all. So I am looking forward to reading the rest of the Westerns in this series. So there we go, that's the complete run, and it's nice to have them all. I don't have them all in the same livery, as I say. I will try and maybe get, if I see any One the Wild in the Field at reasonable prices, so I get a matching set, I will, but I'm not too bothered. I'm just glad to have them as a happy memory of my youth and of this wonderful, wonderful series. And I am going to cover them as I read them. I'll do little reviews, and there will be something about spaghetti westerns coming up as well, and also about traditional westerns, as I've watched 6 in the last week, and I'm really enjoying myself with the western form at the moment. Something I should say is I do know Christopher Frayling, the Leone expert, vaguely. I've talked to him a number of times. He lives in Bath, or he certainly pops up in Bath. I haven't seen him for some time, not since before the pandemic, and we had a really memorable conversation back in 2018 at a Frankenstein event. He's a really, really nice chap. And as he said, of course, why have these films had such appeal to us, apart from being works of stylistic genius? It is because, as he said, they are something to do with death. This is Outlaw Bookseller, signing out for now. Cheers, amigos.